If you're a high-achieving woman who's exhausted by stress, stuck in constant conflict, and tired of being overlooked in the exact rooms where you know you were born to lead, then this podcast is for you. So here's your host, Pallavi Jain.
Welcome to Her Boss Brain, the podcast for high achieving women who are ready to stop leading on inner autopilot. I'm your host, Pallavi Jain, and here we talk about how to activate your boss brain, your ability to be on self start, by learning how to make conscious withdrawals from your inner ATM. Because leadership doesn't begin with doing more, it begins when you arrive, take responsibility, and make a conscious choice. We talk about the neuroscience of leadership, the emotional realities no one prepares you for, and what it truly means to lead from within, especially in terms of stress, change, and uncertainty. As this year comes to a close, there's a question many of us have been quietly asking: whether you're an executive leader, a women leader, a middle manager, an individual contributor, why did this year feel harder than it should have? Not because you weren't capable, not because you didn't work hard enough, but because something deeper was at play. And today we are going to explore what this year actually revealed about how you have been leading, where your inner reserves have been stretched, and how this insight can fundamentally change how you lead in 2026. By the end of January, many people are already exhausted, not because they didn't rest over the holidays, but because they returned to the same internal pace they have been running for years. Same urgency, same pressure, same expectation to hold it all together. And if we name 2025 honestly, it wasn't an easy year to lead in work, in life, or in relationships. There was relentless change, organizational reshuffles that never really settled, economic uncertainty layered onto already stretched systems, and a lot of emotional labor that went unseen, right? Both at work and at home. Now, this year, I worked with leaders across levels: executives, managers, individual contributors, and I also spoke with women carrying invisible leadership every single day in their families. All different roles, but same nervous system load. People who showed up, capable and composed on the outside, while inside they were quietly negotiating with themselves just to stay steady. And it didn't stay contained. Teams felt it. Families felt it. Conversations got shorter. Patience wore thinner because nervous systems are contagious. When we are depleted, it shows not as weakness, but as strain. We also saw some very public leadership moments this year. Moments where leaders reacted instead of responded. Layoff announcements delivered with emotional detachment. There were public outbursts captured on video. Leaders stepping down after cultures quietly eroded. And here's what matters: these weren't failures of intelligence, they weren't a lack of experience or strategy, they were failures of self regulation. When stress becomes chronic, the brain's threat system takes over. The prefrontal cortex we talk about here often, where empathy, perspective, and conscious choice live, it literally goes offline. Your curiosity narrows, listening drops, everything feels urgent, personal, and reactive, isn't it? And if we're not honest, most of us had smaller versions of this somehow, where a sharp response we wish we had softened, a conversation we avoided because we didn't have the capacity, a moment where we led on autopilot even though we knew better. Now, this doesn't make us bad leaders. It makes us human beings who are leading under sustained pressure. Now, for anyone who's been following this podcast, you'll remember we have talked about this stress addiction, how our brains get hooked on the feeling of urgency, even when it's not serving us. That's exactly what was happening here. Capable, committed people moving on autopilot, mistaking survival mode for effectiveness. Let me share my own thing honestly here, what happened, because even after 2 decades in leadership, even after years of studying neuroscience and teaching this work, I caught myself slipping into old patterns this year. Moments where I tried to carry too much alone. Moments where I was withdrawing from my own inner reserves without replenishing them. There were days, when my calendar was full, but my internal capacity was not. I was showing up competent, but not always consciously. And that's when I was reminded of something foundational, that leadership isn't about how much you can endure, it's about where you're leading from. And as we have discussed before, in this podcast, our mind doesn't know the difference between thought and reality, correct? So when we replay conversations, when we imagine worst case outcomes or anticipate failure, our nervous system reacts in this moment as if it's happening right now in real. And that's why conscious withdrawals from the inner ATM are critical. A few months ago, I was driving, nothing dramatic, no traffic jam, no emergency, just an ordinary afternoon on familiar roads. But inside my head, it was anything but calm. I was replaying a conversation, that hadn't gone the way I wanted. And I was mentally drafting an email I hadn't sent yet and thinking about what was next and what I might be missing. And suddenly I noticed my body. My shoulders were tense, my jaw was clenched, my breath was shallow. I was driving, but I wasn't present. It reminded me of being a student driver. You know, you have the hands gripping really tightly over the steering wheel, your eyes darting between mirrors, mind racing with what if I mess up? What if someone honks? Right? You're technically driving, but internally you're bracing. And that's what leadership feels like when you stress your system, right? Like I was driving because you're functioning, you're moving, but everything takes extra effort. That's the SNS survival mode at the wheel. Now, at the red light, I softened my shoulders, I took one deeper breath, and I reminded myself nothing is wrong in this moment. And just like that, I felt myself come back. Same road, same car, but different inner experience. Now, leadership doesn't require you to stop moving, it requires you to notice who is driving. The ear didn't break you, it revealed where you have been leading from. Now, most people start a new year asking, what should I do differently? What should I fix? What should I push harder on? But neuroscience points us to a better question. Who do I need to become internally so I can lead well externally? Because leadership feels manageable when things are calm, but it's revealed when pressure is high. That's when we find out whether we're on autopilot or whether we are on self start. So when stress becomes the norm, the brain defaults to survival, right? Now, the boss brain, clarity, empathy, conscious choice, it becomes harder to access. Not because you don't care, but because you're overdrawing from your inner reserves. And here's where negative bias comes in that we have learned in the first 10 episodes of this podcast, where we talked about our brain naturally weighs threats, mistakes, and failures more than wins. That's why reflection often feels heavy. So it's important to also notice what worked, what we sustained, and where we made conscious choices because it's very critical. Now, every day, leadership requires withdrawals, whether it be emotional, cognitive, relational. And the issue isn't withdrawing, the issue is whether it's conscious. Unconscious withdrawals drains us. Conscious withdrawals activate us. And this is what it means to lead from within. To notice, what am I withdrawing right now? Am I activating my boss brain or defaulting to old survival patterns? Is this aligned with who I want to be? Leadership is self discovery in motion. And as we have discussed in previous episodes, moving from knowing to doing is the difference between insight and transformation. ATM isn't just a concept, it's a daily practice for personal mastery that actually moves you from just knowing about stuff to actually doing them. Let me share a moment from a recent workshop. There was a woman there, let's call her Anita, and she wasn't an executive, she wasn't new. She was actually a middle manager. You can definitely see that, picture that, pressure coming from above, expectations coming from below. So during the break, she said to me, I feel like I'm constantly translating stress. Her boss's urgency came down to her team's frustration came up to her, and somewhere in the middle, she disappeared, right? I could see the tightness in her body and the tension in her voice. And I asked her, when pressure hits, where are you taking responsibility for things that aren't actually yours? She paused and said, I take on everyone's emotions so no one else has to. Now that's an unconscious withdrawal. Later, she practiced arriving before responding, naming what was hers and what wasn't, what is it that truly matters, and making one conscious choice in how she spoke to her team. And at the end of the day, she said, nothing changed outside, but I wasn't exhausted by 3 p.m. for the first time in months. You see, same role, same pressure, but different inner leadership. That's what being on self start looks like. Not because life is calm, not because stress will disappear, but because your inner leadership is online. You don't outsource regulation, you don't abandon yourself under pressure. Think of it as the if then loop we have learned before. If you notice your stress rising and your boss brain fading, then take a conscious withdrawal and choose your response. Do this enough and it becomes automatic. Your inner leadership running on autopilot while your nervous system stays calm. Now, this is leadership no machine can replicate because it's rooted in consciousness. So remember this, that you don't need to erase 2025. You don't need to judge it. Your missteps weren't failures, they were data. And more importantly, they are a permission slip. Permission to stop repeating the same patterns, permission to try something different, permission to lead from within. Remember Simone Biles choosing her mental health over competition? Sheetal Devi making decisions aligned with her values and inner strength. These are examples of conscious choice under pressure, the essence of being on self start. Let's promise ourselves, I will not repeat the same patterns and expect a different year. I will lead from within. Now, as you step into 2026, I want you to ask yourself these 3 questions. Okay, I want you to write these down. Number 1, where did I lead on autopilot and what did it cost me? Number 2, what would conscious withdrawal look like for me? And number 3, how will I activate my boss brain this week, no matter what happens? Awareness restores agency, and agency is leadership. Now, if you're listening and thinking, I don't want to do next year the same way, you don't have to do this alone. This is the work I do in my workshops and also the Rewired Women program that's coming out next year for women who are ready to lead consciously for themselves and, most importantly, for people around them. We work at the level of nervous system, thought patterns, real life decisions, and also help you translate all this knowledge and neuroscience into daily action, because that's where transformation happens. So it's not just insight, it's an integration. Remember that leadership doesn't begin with fixing what's broken. It begins with discovering who you are under pressure. 2026 doesn't need a new version of you. It just needs a more conscious one. This week, I want you to notice one moment when your nervous system wants to hijack your leadership and make a conscious withdrawal instead. That small act is the beginning of being on self start. And if you have been with us through the first episodes, remember, stress can be addictive. Your mind can trick you, and ATM isn't just a concept. It's the practice that turns knowing into doing. I want you to thank you once again for showing up in this space, for choosing to lead from within and spreading this consciousness into the world, into your teams, into your families, and inspiring them to be on self start. And I want you to spread your arms and welcome 2026 with good cheer, great energy, and inner leadership, because I am.
So that's it for today's episode of our Boss Brain podcast. Head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, or wherever you listen and subscribe to the show. One lucky listener every single week that posts a review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes will win a chance in a grand prize drawing to win a $25,000 private VIP day with Pallavi herself. Be sure to head on over to her bossbrainpodcast.com and pick up a free copy of Pallavi's gift and join us next time.